At my 70th birthday party, my husband raised his glass and announced he was leaving me for a younger woman, and my daughters began to clap joyfully. I calmly set aside my plate and said loudly, "Rejoice, girls, but know this: I didn't give birth to you. I took you out of foster care, out of pity, and today, my pity has run out. And as for what I did next, friends, make sure to subscribe to the channel and write in the comments which city you're from. I'm very interested to know our geography. Happy listening." The hall smelled of expensive lilies, heavy French perfume, and the cold, metallic scent of the approaching winter. The lamps burned too brightly, reflecting in the mirrors of the rented banquet hall in downtown Chicago, which I had paid for a week ago. The light was merciless. It highlighted every wrinkle on the guests' faces, every speck of dust on the velvet drapes, and, most importantly, every fake smile at that table. I sat at the head of the table, holding my back as straight as I did at board meetings at the steel mill 30 years ago. I was Lorraine Sterling, the director of human resources, the iron lady who could silence an entire factory floor with a single glance. Right now, I looked at my loving family and felt not warmth, but that familiar, cold prickle of intuition. The same feeling that arose before a major union strike or a sudden IRS audit. To my right sat Richard, my husband. He had turned 72, but he looked as if he intended to live 3 more lives, fit, with dyed temples, and wearing a bespoke suit that cost as much as 3 months of an engineer's salary. He resembled an aging peacock who was still convinced his tail was the center of the universe. I knew this suit. I remembered signing the check for it, listening to his stories about how important it was to look presentable for potential investors. Investors who never existed. But it wasn't the suit that caught my attention. It was the smell. Richard smelled of sandalwood and leather. It was a specific cologne, very expensive, very rare. The bottle stood at the back of his cabinet in the master bath, untouched for years. Richard used it only on 2 occasions, when he was trying to beg money from me for another failed business project or when he wanted to impress a woman. Today he hadn't asked for money, which meant only the second option remained. I shifted my gaze to my daughters. Ashley and Madison sat opposite, like 2 exotic birds that had flown into our climate by mistake. Ashley, the older one, nervously twisted a diamond bracelet on her wrist. The light played on the facets of the stones. A beautiful piece. I bought it for her last month when she cried into the phone that all her friends had status symbols, while she felt like a gray mouse. That bracelet cost my entire annual consulting bonus. Now, she didn't even look at me. Her gaze darted around the hall, periodically meeting Madison's eyes, and then sliding to her father. Madison, the younger one, was calmer, but arrogance slipped through her composure. She lazily picked at an arugula and shrimp salad from the catering menu with her fork. Next to it, on a beautiful platter, stood my signature homemade meat and cabbage hand pies. I had baked them today since 5 a.m. The same pies they loved so much in childhood, when we lived in a small apartment and I worked double shifts to pay for their tutors. The pies were untouched. They were cooling, becoming unwanted monuments to my past. The girls were demonstratively ignoring the homemade food, preferring the soulless catering. It was a trifle. For someone else, just a whim of adult children. But I, a woman who had managed personnel for 40 years, knew that the devil is in the details. Refusing food prepared by a mother on the day of her jubilee isn't a lack of appetite. It's a manifesto. It is a statement that my efforts are no longer worth anything. I took a sip of water. It tasted bitter. I remembered the years when Richard was finding himself. In the 90s, when the industry was collapsing, I kept us afloat. I would come home after dark, my face gray with exhaustion, and he would meet me with burning eyes and ideas about flipping penny stocks, opening kiosks, or running auto shops. And every time, I took out our savings. "It's an investment, Lorraine. You don't understand," he would say. And every time, the money vanished. And the girls? I gave them everything. The best private schools, universities, condos, cars. I thought I was buying them a future. But looking at them now, I saw that I had only purchased their contempt for hard work. They were used to money appearing in the nightstand, and Mom being just a function, an ATM with a hugging feature. Ashley exchanged glances with Richard again. A smirk flickered on her lips, barely noticeable, quick as a shadow, but I saw it. It wasn't the smile of a daughter proud of her mother. It was the smirk of an accomplice. They knew something I didn't know. The air in the hall thickened. The hum of guests, former colleagues, distant relatives, seemed like the distant noise of the surf. I felt as if I were standing on the tracks, seeing the light of an approaching train, but unable to step off the rails because I had to watch this performance to the end. Richard straightened his tie. He was nervous. I saw a vein pulsing in his neck. He cast a quick glance at the entrance door, as if expecting someone, then looked at the daughters. Madison gave him a barely perceptible nod. It was a signal. The script was written, the roles cast, and I was assigned a part in this play that I could only guess at for now. I calmly placed my napkin on my lap. My hands didn't shake. Over years of working with people, I had learned one main rule: never show fear until you assess the scale of the threat. I didn't yet know exactly what they were planning, but I knew for sure this celebration was not for me. It was the funeral of my old life. They just forgot to warn me. Richard slowly rose from his seat. The hall began to quiet down. Guests turned their heads, expecting the traditional toast of a loving husband. Expecting words of gratitude, of years lived together, of loyalty. He picked up a crystal goblet. The thin ring of a knife against the glass cut the silence like a scalpel. Everyone froze. Richard smiled, but the smile didn't touch his eyes. In them was the cold, triumphant glint of a man who is sure he has finally won the lottery. "Friends," he began, and his voice was unnaturally loud, theatrical. "We gathered here to mark an important date. 70 years is a serious milestone. It is a time to take stock, and a time to free oneself from excess baggage." I didn't flinch. I looked straight at him, unblinking. Excess baggage. There it was. "I want to raise this glass not to the past," Richard continued, and his gaze slid over me as if I were empty space, "but to the future. To my future. To the real passion that I deserve. Today, I am declaring my freedom." A deathly silence hung over the hall, but I knew the worst was yet to come. Richard's words hung in the air, thick and sticky like spilled syrup. He spoke of Kayla, saying that at his age, he earned the right to real, living passion and not a dismal waiting for the end. He didn't even look at me. His gaze wandered somewhere above the guests' heads, as if he were reading this text from an invisible teleprompter. The silence in the hall was so absolute that you could hear the refrigerator humming behind the bar. The guests, my colleagues, our mutual acquaintances, neighbors sat with their mouths open. Someone lowered their eyes to their plate. Someone looked at me with horror, expecting hysteria, fainting, or screaming. They were waiting for a show. But the show started from the other side. In this dead silence, a sound rang out. A clap, then another, rhythmic, dry, confident. I slowly turned my head. Ashley and Madison were clapping. They were smiling at their father, nodding to him, as if supporting a talented child at a school recital. "Bravo, Dad!" Ashley shouted brightly. Her diamond bracelet sparkled in the lamplight. "You finally decided to do it." Madison turned to me. In her eyes, there was not a drop of sympathy, not a shadow of guilt, only a cold, calculating glint that I had seen in dishonest suppliers trying to pawn off a defective batch of parts on us. "Mom, don't make that face," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Let's be honest. You've been strangers for a long time. Dad deserves happiness. He needs a muse, not a warden." "We discussed everything, Mom," Ashley chimed in, sipping champagne. "It's time for you to rest too. We've found a great option. A quiet little house in the country, out in rural Illinois. Fresh air, a garden, no worries. It will be calmer for you there, and Dad and I will take care of the condo and the bills so as not to burden you. You're tired. It's time to fade into the shadows." Fade into the shadows? A little house in the country. They weren't just kicking me out of my own life. They had already divided everything up. While I was choosing this hall, while I was baking pies, while I was wiring money to their accounts, they sat and chose a place for my exile. They planned my disposal, just as one writes off obsolete equipment for scrap. Something clicked inside me, quietly, like a camera shutter. Many think that in such moments the world collapses, that the heart breaks into pieces. Nonsense. In such moments, the world becomes crystal clear. Emotions, love, resentment, pity, evaporated instantly, as if burned out by fire. Only a cold, ringing void and an absolute understanding of the situation remained. I looked at them and saw not my daughters. I saw two strangers, greedy women whom I had fed with my life for 40 years. and that contract had just expired. I slowly picked up my plate with the untouched salad and carefully set it on the table, slightly to the side. The china clinked against the glass tabletop. The sound was quiet, but in that tense silence, it sounded like a gunshot. Ashley stopped smiling. Madison froze with her fork near her mouth. Richard finally deigned to look at me, expecting tears. I didn't stand up. I simply straightened my back even more and looked straight into Ashley's eyes, then Madison's. My voice was calm, even the voice of the HR director whom truants feared. "Rejoice, girls," I said. And my voice easily reached every corner of the hall without a microphone. "Clap louder." But know one thing. I paused, giving them a chance to feel the cold radiating from me. "I didn't give birth to you." A gasp swept through the hall. Ashley went pale. The spots of blush on her cheeks became frighteningly bright. "What are you talking about?" she started, but I didn't let her continue. "I took you from a foster center in Gary, Indiana, when you were 2 and 3 years old. Your biological mother gave you up because you interfered with her drinking. I took you out of pity, out of that same pity that forced me to pay for your whims, your cars, your condos, and your endless debts all these years." Richard opened his mouth, intending to say something, but I shifted my gaze to him. In my eyes, there was no reproach, no pain, only boredom. "And today," I continued, rising from the chair, "my pity has ended. You wanted independence for your father? You got it. You wanted me to fade into the shadows? I'm leaving. But my wallet leaves with me. You are grown women. You have neither my blood nor, as I see, my conscience. Which means I have no obligations to you whatsoever." I picked up my handbag. Calmly, without fuss. "Happy birthday to me," I tossed into the void. I turned and walked toward the exit. I felt their gazes on my back, confused, frightened, malicious. They hadn't yet realized what had happened. They thought these were just the words of an offended old woman. They thought that tomorrow I would cool down and bring them money again. Fools. I walked out of the stuffy hall into the cool lobby. The coat check attendant, a young guy, fearfully handed me my coat. I threw it over my shoulders, feeling that with every step, it became easier to breathe. I took out my phone. The name Stanley, attorney, lit up on the screen. I pressed call. It rang for exactly 2 seconds. "Yes, Lorraine." Stanley's voice was crisp and collected, as always. "Stanley," I said, looking at my reflection in the dark glass of the entrance door. "Initiate the audit of the family accounts. Full freeze, right now." The morning of the next day began not with tears into a pillow and not with heart medication. It began with the smell of freshly brewed coffee and the rustle of documents. At 8 a.m., I was already standing at the doors of the central bank branch. I was wearing my favorite charcoal gray business suit, and under my arm was a folder of papers I had been preparing for years. Not because I planned revenge, but because order in business is the foundation of security. Always. The teller, a young girl with frightened eyes, tried to say that for such operations, the presence of the additional cardholders was required. "Honey," I smiled at her the way I smiled at union leaders before refusing a rate hike. "Look at Clause 4.2 of the trust agreement. The primary account holder has the right to revoke third-party access unilaterally without notification. I am the primary holder. The third parties are parasites I am no longer feeding. Block it." I watched her fingers fly across the keyboard. Every keystroke was music to me. Click, and Madison won't be able to buy herself a Starbucks coffee on my dime. Click, and Ashley won't pay for another massage session with my card. Click, and Richard remains without funds for gas for his car, which, by the way, was also titled in my name. From the bank, I headed straight to Stanley. His law firm smelled of old paper and reliability. Stanley met me silently, just nodding at a stack of already prepared forms. We understood each other without words. 40 years ago, we shoveled through the mess at the factory together when the director ran off with the petty cash. Now we were shoveling through the mess of my personal life. "Motion to cease financial support," he stated dryly, handing me a pen. Grounds. Reaching the age of majority and absence of disability. Given the nuances of the adoption statutes of the ADS, you have every right to demand alimony from them, Lorraine, not support them. But for now, we'll just turn off the tap. I signed the paper. The signature came out firm, sweeping. I felt a strange lightness. As if a heavy backpack, which I had been dragging uphill for decades thinking it was my cross to bear, had been removed from my shoulders, and it was just a sack of rocks. Meanwhile, as my eyes and ears reported to me the concierge in our building, whom I always tipped generously for the holidays the family had gathered in the apartment. In my apartment, Richard, apparently in his peacock self-satisfaction, decided that the condo was community property that he would generously keep for himself. Fool. The condo was corporate housing privatized personally to me before our marriage, but I didn't kick them out just yet. Let them relax. Let them feel the taste of victory. They were drinking wine. That same vintage French wine I bought 3 years ago and was saving for a special occasion. Apparently, the departure of a mother and wife is that very special occasion. The concierge said she heard laughter and music. They were celebrating. They thought I was sitting on a bench in a park somewhere right now, sobbing and thinking about how to beg for their forgiveness. "Mom is just throwing a fit," Ashley was surely saying, swirling her glass. "She'll get over it and come crawling back. Where will she go? Old people are scared to be alone." "Yeah," Richard would agree, sprawled in my armchair. "She'll be lost without me. Who's going to screw in a light bulb for her?" I sat in Stanley's office, drinking strong tea and imagining this picture. Their confidence was their main weakness. They were so used to considering me convenient furniture that they couldn't even entertain the thought that the furniture might fight back. I looked at my watch. 11:45 a.m., time for the first strike. I took out my phone and opened the leasing company's app. 2 cars, a white crossover for Ashley and a sports coupe for Madison. Both cars on a lease, signed by my LLC. Payments were deducted automatically from my account on the 1st of every month. Today was the 2nd, but I didn't wait for next month. I pressed the button. Early termination of agreement with immediate vehicle return. The penalty for termination was substantial, but the pleasure I was experiencing right now was worth every dollar. "Done," I told Stanley. "It's about to start," he chuckled, looking at his phone. Exactly 3 minutes passed. My phone, which I had prudently put on silent mode, came alive. Ashley's photo flashed on the screen, then Madison's, then Ashley's again. The calls came one after another, a continuous stream. I looked at the blinking screen and calmly finished my tea. They got the notification. "Dear client, the lease agreement has been terminated. Your vehicle's engine has been remotely immobilized. Please leave the keys in the car and await the tow truck. Thank you for choosing us." I imagined their faces. Ashley was likely getting ready to drive to the beauty salon. She sat in the car, pressed the start button, and in response, silence and a cold message on the dashboard. Madison was probably planning a shopping trip. Now they would have to master public transportation or Uber. "Oh wait, the cards are blocked too." I didn't answer. Let them call. Let them panic. Let them start to realize that the old senile woman didn't just get offended, she started a war. And in this war, they have neither weapons nor ammunition, only empty ambitions and declined credit cards. I stood up, adjusted my jacket, and nodded to Stanley. "This is just the beginning, Stan. I'm going to have lunch at that steakhouse Richard dreamed of going to, but was too cheap to pay for. Bon appétit." "You earned it, Lorraine." He winked. I walked out onto the street. The autumn sun shone brightly but didn't warm, much like my former family. But I was warm. I was warmed by anticipation. I had only started setting up the pieces, and they had already lost their nights. The door to my office flew open with such a crash it was as if it had been breached by a battering ram. On the threshold stood Ashley and Madison, out of breath, disheveled, with faces twisted in anger. Ashley was still clutching the useless car key in her hand like a magic amulet that had suddenly stopped working. "What do you think you're doing?" she shrieked, not bothering with a greeting. "My car won't start. There's some kind of block. I had to take a cab here like a beggar." Madison, whose rage was colder but no less toxic, stepped forward. "Mom, this isn't funny anymore. You're crossing the line. Blocking cards is one thing, but depriving us of transportation, that's petty. Put everything back the way it was, immediately." I sat at my desk, calmly filing a nail with a diamond-dusted file. Quiet classical music played in the office. It smelled of fresh coffee and expensive wood. I didn't even raise my eyes. "Good afternoon, girls," I said in an even tone, continuing my task. Apparently, No one ever taught you to knock. As for the cars, you are independent adult women now, right? Independent, proud, and independent women pay their own bills. Leasing is an expensive pleasure. I decided I didn't have the right to deprive you of the joy of paying for yourselves. Are you mocking us? Ashley hissed. We don't have that kind of money. Do you know how much the maintenance on that heap costs? I finally looked up. There was not a drop of warmth in my eyes. I know. I paid for that heap for 3 years. Now it's your turn. Or, I paused, enjoying the moment. You can use the bus. They say it's very eco-friendly. At that moment, Richard sauntered into the office. He looked as if he had just won at a casino, although I knew his pockets were empty. Trailing behind him was the scent of that expensive cologne, which now evoked only mild nausea in me. So, had enough of playing the Iron Lady, Lorraine? He smirked, walking to the visitor's chair and sitting without an invitation. The girls told me everything. Kindergarten stuff, honestly. Blocks, cancellations. You're just trying to get attention. You're hurt, I understand, but let's not organize a circus. He leaned back in the chair, crossing his legs. I need money, Lorraine. My half. I'm leaving, but I don't intend to leave empty-handed. We lived together for 40 years, and half of everything we have is mine by law. I want to take my share now, so I don't have to drag this through the courts. I need to start a new life. With Kayla. I put down the nail file and looked at him with undisguised interest, like a rare insect. Your half? I asked quietly. Richard, do you seriously think you have a half here? Of course, he snorted. I invested in the family. I created the atmosphere. I was your support system. And anyway, you're just an old, bitter corporate rat who understands nothing about modern business. You sat on your salary while I looked for opportunities. You're just jealous that I found someone younger and brighter. Corporate rat. Looked for opportunities. I remembered all his opportunities. Pyramid schemes, shady stocks, the garage co-op that burned down along with the investors' money. I remembered paying off his debts to loan sharks in the 90s, selling my jewelry. I remembered how he created the atmosphere lying on the sofa while I wrote reports at night. But I stayed silent. I didn't scream, didn't list his failures, or rub his nose in the facts. Why? Never interrupt an enemy when he is making a mistake, and his mistake was fatal. He underestimated me. He saw in me only an offended wife, not a CFO with 40 years of experience. All right, Richard, I said conciliatorily, as if surrendering. You're right. Courts are long and messy. I don't want scandals. The daughter's eyes lit up. They exchanged glances. It worked, read in their looks. Mom broke. That's a good girl, Richard nodded, already mentally spending the money. I knew you were a reasonable woman. Where is the money? In that brokerage account or the safety deposit box? I sighed heavily, feigning submission to fate. Part is there, part in bonds. I need time to liquidate everything and prepare the documents. Come by in a couple of days. We'll sign everything. Don't drag it out, Lorraine, he threw out, standing up. Kayla doesn't like to wait. They left as noisily as they appeared, confident in their victory. I heard their voices in the corridor. See, I told you, Ashley's voice. She scared us and then folded. Dad, you're a genius, Madison giggled. How you pressed her. I remained alone in the silence of the office. A slight smile played on my lips. They didn't notice the main thing. While they were shouting and demanding, I had neatly pushed a thick folder to the edge of the desk, red, conspicuous, with a large marker inscription, Inheritance, Final Distribution. I saw Richard linger his gaze on it before exiting. I saw him subtly, while the daughters distracted me with screams, take out his phone and snap a quick picture of the cover and the protruding corner of the ledger with the numbers. In that ledger were numbers huge, beautiful numbers, millions, that he dreamed of. Only, they weren't assets. They were old written-off factory debts, formatted as an example for an audit report from 10 years ago. But Richard didn't know that. He saw only total and a lot of zeros. Now he will think he hit the jackpot. He will tell Kayla about it. Kayla will tell her friends. Greed is the best guide dog. It will lead them straight into the trap. I opened a drawer and took out another folder, the real one. Inside lay not millions, but checks. Dozens. Hundreds of checks. IOUs. Bank statements. Every penny Richard stole from me over the years, every transfer for business development that went to gifts for mistresses. I collected this dossier not for a divorce. I collected it for my protection. Just in case. The case had arrived. Think you know where the money is, Rick? I whispered, stroking the spine of the folder. You have no idea how much you owe me. I dialed Stanley's number. They took the bait, I said shortly. Start preparing the Reconciliation Act and find out everything about this Kayla. I want to know her every step, every loan, every ex. I need the dossier by evening. Will do, Lorraine, he answered. The fish is swimming into the net. The fish thinks it's a shark, I chuckled, but it's just bait. Evening descended on the city like a gray fog, but there was no room for rest in my schedule. The meeting with Olivia, the county clerk, and my longtime friend was scheduled in a small cafe on the outskirts. Olivia didn't like prying eyes, and I needed information that isn't discussed over the phone. Olivia arrived with a thin folder. She looked concerned, which was uncharacteristic for an iron woman who had registered marriages and deaths for 40 years. Lorraine, she began without preamble, not even touching her tea. You asked me to check this girl, Kayla. Officially, she's clean as a baby's tear. But I pulled some old strings in the records department, and here's what's strange. She opened the folder. Kayla Smith, 26 years old, came from out of state 6 months ago, doesn't work anywhere officially, but her listed address is, do you know where? In the apartment that your daughter Ashley rents as a warehouse for her online store. I froze. The teacup remained in the air. Ashley? I asked again, although my brain had already started assembling the puzzle. Yes, and that's not all. Olivia lowered her voice. I found a witness, Kayla's friend, who worked in our archives as an intern. She blabbed that Kayla was hired. The scene with the accidental meeting of Richard at the fitness club was scripted. Your daughters, Lorraine, sought her out purposefully. They needed a predator, stupid, greedy, but flashy. I slowly placed the cup on the saucer. Inside me, there was no pain. There was a sensation as if I had plunged my hand into ice water. The cold clarified my mind. Why? I asked quietly. Richard would have left anyway if he wanted to. Why this circus? To break you, Olivia answered harshly. They didn't just need a divorce. They needed you to have a nervous breakdown. That intern heard Kayla bragging. We'll drive the old hag to a stroke or the loony bin, and we'll get guardianship and access to all accounts. They promised Kayla 20% of your estate if she forced Richard to act quickly and brutally. I was silent. I looked out the window where car headlights flashed. It wasn't just a husband leaving. It wasn't just the ingratitude of children. It was a hunt, a planned, cynical hunt for me. My daughters, whom I pulled out of the dirt, whom I treated, educated, dressed. They didn't just want money. They were ready to drive me to the grave or a mental institution to get that money faster. The quiet house in the country Ashley spoke of. Now I understood it wasn't a vacation. It was isolation. A place where I was supposed to quietly fade away under the supervision of nurses while they divided my life. I felt something inside me finally turn to stone. The last drops of pity, doubt, maternal sentimentality evaporated. If up to this moment I just wanted to teach them a lesson, now I understood. I must destroy them. Not physically, no. I must destroy their world, their ambitions, their confidence in impunity. I must leave them naked in the freezing cold, just as I found them 35 years ago. Thank you, Liv, I said, standing up. You saved my life. What are you going to do? She asked anxiously. What I do best. I put on my gloves, slowly smoothing each finger. Human resources management. I'm going to conduct a staff reduction. I returned home. The condo met me with silence, but now this silence seemed ominous. I walked into the kitchen. My gaze slid over familiar things. The kettle, the fruit bowl, the spice rack. My gaze caught on a decorative plate on the top shelf. It stood slightly crooked. I always placed it perfectly centered. I pulled up a chair, stood on it, and looked behind the plate. There, stuck with double-sided tape, a tiny red light blinked on a black bug. A voice recorder with a data transmission function. I took it down, turning it in my hands. Cheap Chinese. They sell these in spy shops for jealous wives. So, they were listening to me, listening to my conversations with Stanley, listening to me cry once into my pillow. They surely enjoyed that sound. They knew my every step in this apartment. That's how Richard knew about the brokerage account. I spoke on the phone with the manager a week ago discussing interest rates. I didn't smash the bug. I didn't throw it away. I climbed down from the chair, poured myself a glass of water, and smiled. The smile of a wolf that saw a trap and decided to use it against the hunter. You want to listen, girls? You want to know my plans? Well then, I will put on a radio play for you such that you will believe every word, and this play will lead you straight into the abyss. I placed the bug on the table right in front of me. Stanley, I said loudly and clearly into the empty kitchen, knowing that somewhere Ashley, wearing headphones, would flinch and turn up the volume. I've been thinking, I'm tired of fighting. Maybe they're right. Maybe I really should sign over the asset management to them. I feel so bad. My heart is acting up. Tomorrow I'll gather everyone. I want to be done with this world. I paused. Prepare the documents for the general power of attorney. I surrender. I turned off the light and went to sleep. I knew that tonight they wouldn't sleep. They would be celebrating victory, a victory that would become their end. The next morning, I called Ashley. My voice trembled not from fear, but from acting skills honed by years of negotiations with unions. Sweetheart, I wheezed into the receiver. I feel bad. I was probably wrong. Come over, everyone, and bring Dad, and that girl. Kayla, I want to settle everything. I can't fight anymore. They rushed over in 40 minutes faster than an ambulance. I sat in the living room, wrapped in an old shawl, without makeup, with intentionally disheveled hair. On the table before the sofa stood a battery of medicine bottles, heart drops, sedatives. The set dressing was perfect. Ashley flew in first. On her face was written poorly concealed triumph, masked as concern. "Mommy!" She rushed to me, trying to hug me. She smelled of expensive perfume and hypocrisy. "Why did you drive yourself to this state? We told you, you need rest." Madison walked in next, holding Richard by the arm, and beside him scurried Kayla. The girl looked as if she had arrived at a gala. Bright makeup, a short dress, a predatory gaze assessing the furnishings of my apartment. "Lorraine, why are you staging a drama?" Richard tried to portray fatherly concern, but his eyes were already scanning the room, searching for documents. "We're family. We'll solve everything." "Kayla, she really wanted to meet you. She's a kind girl. She'll help you." I looked at Kayla. The kind girl who planned to commit me to a psych ward for 20%. "Hello, Kayla," I said quietly, feigning submission. "Come in, sit down." They sat around me like vultures around a dying antelope. I saw their impatience. They didn't need my apologies. They needed my signature. "I thought a lot last night," I began, looking at the floor. "I'm old. I'm tired." "You're right. I understand nothing about modern life. These blocks, lawsuits, it's not for me. I want peace." "Of course, Mom," Madison exclaimed, squeezing my hand. Her palm was cold and clammy. "We'll take care of you. You just need to trust us." I sighed heavily and pulled a folder from under the shawl. "Stanley prepared the documents," I said. "Here is the power of attorney for asset management. And one more thing. Richard, you spoke about a business?" My husband's eyes lit up with greedy fire. "Yes, Lorraine, a unique project. Investments will pay off in 6 months. I just need—" "I know," I interrupted him with a weak voice. "I have an account, the one you spoke of. There is a large sum there. I was saving it for old age, but since you are taking care of me, why do I need it?" An electric discharge went through the room. Greed became almost tangible. Ashley stopped breathing. Kayla leaned forward, forgetting modesty. "But there are bank conditions," I continued, opening the folder to the required page. "To unfreeze this account and transfer funds to your project, the signatures of all participants are needed. As guarantors, it's a formality. The bank wants to see that the family is united." I placed the document before them. Agreement on Consolidated Liability and Asset Transfer. The title sounded solid and confusing. The text was typed in fine print with many legal terms. But the essence was simple. I knew they wouldn't read it. They would see the words asset transfer and the sum I had written in the preamble, $15 million, a sum that hadn't been in that account for a long time. "Right here," I pointed with a trembling finger to the signature line. Sign, and I will send the scan to the bank immediately. The money will be with you tomorrow." Richard grabbed the pen first. He didn't even skim the text. He saw only the 15 million. "Of course, Lorraine. This is right. Money must work." He signed with a flourish. Ashley snatched the pen from her father. "Mom, you finally acted wisely," she said, putting down her squiggle. Madison signed next. "And me? Do I need to as well?" Kayla asked, looking uncertainly at Richard. "Of course, child." I smiled at her with the most pathetic smile I was capable of. "You are now part of the family. You will help Richard in business. Your signature will show the bank the seriousness of intentions." Kayla beamed. Being part of the family for her meant being part of the money. She signed without even flinching. I took the folder back, pressing it to my chest like the greatest treasure. "Well, that's it," I exhaled, leaning back on the pillow. "Now I am calm." "We'll be going, Mom." Ashley jumped up immediately. "Need to prepare everything for the transfer. We'll call you." "Yes, Lorraine, rest," Richard threw out, already heading for the door. "We'll do everything ourselves." They left, elated. They were already dividing the skin of a bear that wasn't dead. As soon as the door clicked shut, I threw off the shawl and stood up. My back straightened again, and the senile infirmity vanished without a trace. I walked to the window and watched them get into a taxi, gesturing excitedly. I opened the folder and looked at their signatures. 4 signatures under Clause 7.4. The signatories hereby assume full and unconditional joint and several liability for all existing debt obligations of Lorraine Sterling, including but not limited to tax arrears of past periods, obligations under credit agreements of third parties for which she acted as guarantor, and also acknowledge all funds previously issued by L. Sterling to Richard Sterling as personal debt subject to immediate repayment with accrued interest. They thought they were signing for access to my money. In reality, they signed a confession of their debts and took upon themselves my obligations for an old, lingering corporate guarantee for the factory, which I had planned to close long ago. But now it is their debt. And Richard's debt to me is now notarized, and with the personal guarantee of the daughters and the mistress. I dialed Stanley's number. "They signed," I said calmly. "All 4. Kayla is in on it too." "Genius, Lorraine," Stanley laughed. "You just hung a $12 million debt on them and recognition of all Richard's loans. They are bankrupt without even knowing it. Send the documents to the bank and the collections officers," I commanded. "Let the surprise be official." I went to the kitchen, took that bug from the table, and threw it into the trash can. The show is over. Intermission. And in the 3rd act, there will be an execution. I spent the next 3 days not with a handkerchief in my hands, but with a phone receiver at my ear. My home office turned into a command post. I wasn't just preparing a divorce. I was conducting a cleanup operation. First, I opened my address book, the one in leather binding where numbers accumulated over 40 years of work at the corporation were stored. Factory directors, CFOs of major holdings, wives of city officials with whom we organized charity balls. It wasn't just a phone book. It was a map of influence in our city. I called methodically down the list. My voice was calm, with a slight note of sadness that evoked not pity, but indignation on the other end of the line. "Hello, Veronica. Yes, long time no see. Heard the news?" "Yes. Richard left for a young one. But that's half the trouble. The girls. They decided I'm no longer needed. They're kicking me out of the apartment." "Yes, imagine that. I didn't ask for help. I just informed. I knew how this mechanism worked. By evening, the entire city elite would know that Richard isn't just an aging Lothario, but a scoundrel who abandoned the wife who made him a human being. That Ashley and Madison aren't socialites, but heartless predators. I knew that Richard planned to seek investors for his new business in precisely this circle. Now, all doors would be closed to him. Not a single self-respecting businessman would give money to a man who treated Lorraine Sterling that way. Reputation is currency, and I had just crashed their exchange rate to 0. Then I busied myself with the final presentation literally. I sat at the computer, assembling slides. Slide 1. Statements from Richard's accounts over 10 years. Spending on restaurants, hotels, gifts to partners. Read. Mistresses. Slide 2. Correspondence between Ashley, Madison, and Kayla. Screenshots that Olivia kindly provided me, using her connections in the telecom companies. Let's squeeze the old hag. 20% is yours. She'll croak soon. Slide 3. The document they signed yesterday. Close-up of the clause on debts. I printed this in color in several copies. These weren't just papers, they were tickets to their execution. Stanley called on Thursday evening. Everything is ready, Lorraine. The bank accepted the documents. The enforcement proceedings on the factory debts, which hung on you as a guarantor, are now officially transferred to the new joint debtors. To Richard, Ashley, Madison, and Miss Smith. The debt amount with penalties is $12,700,000, plus your personal lawsuits against Richard. Excellent, I answered, looking at the sunset. When will they find out? Notifications have already been sent, but the mail is slow. However, the account freeze by court order will trigger tomorrow morning, just in time for their party. Their party. I knew what they were planning, a victory party at the trendy club, the Atrium. They intended to announce Richard and Kayla's engagement and simultaneously celebrate receiving my millions. They thought I was sitting at home, packing suitcases for rural Illinois. They didn't suspect that I would come too, and that I would be the guest of honor. On Friday morning, I felt the air around them begin to thicken. They didn't yet understand what was happening, but they already sensed something was wrong. Ashley called me at lunch. Her voice was nervous. Mom, did you send the documents to the bank? Why hasn't the money arrived yet? I need to pay the deposit for the hall. The bank is verifying signatures, honey, I answered affectionately. It's a large sum. Bureaucracy. Don't worry, by evening everything will be there. Celebrate calmly, I'll pay for everything later. She believed it. Greed always drowns out intuition. But the first bell rang for Richard. I knew this because the owner of the business center where Richard was pompously intending to rent an office for his empire called me. An old acquaintance whom I once saved from a tax audit. Lorraine, he said, your ex is tearing down the door to sign the lease, but I turned him down. Why? I asked, though I knew the answer. Said he didn't pass the security check. Lack of reliable references. You should have heard how he yelled, shouted that he is Lorraine Sterling's husband. And I tell him, was a husband? Now gone. And without her, Rick, you're a zero without a stick. I smiled. Thanks, Bill. Let me know if you need anything. We take care of our own. In the evening, I began to get ready. I didn't wear mourning black. I chose a suit, the color of ivory. Elegant, expensive, flawless. The same one in which I received the Person of the Year award 5 years ago. I did my hair, put on pearls. I looked in the mirror and saw not an abandoned wife. I saw a prosecutor walking into court to read the verdict. On the table lay the folder with documents and a flash drive with the presentation. The phone beeped. A message from Stanley. Account seized. Surprise activated. I took my handbag. It was time. I called a taxi to the Atrium. I knew they were already there, drinking champagne on credit, accepting congratulations from the few hangers-on they managed to gather. They think life is a success. They don't know that in an hour their life will turn into a pumpkin. And even the fairy godmother won't help them, because the fairy is me, and I just quit. The music in the Atrium thundered, so that the floor vibrated. I entered the hall, and security parted before me. They knew me. I had organized corporate events for the company here for 10 years in a row. The hall was full. Richard hadn't skimped. He booked the VIP zone on the balcony, which offered a view of the dance floor. I walked up the stairs, unhurriedly, with the dignity of a queen walking to the scaffold to pardon herself and execute the executioner. They sat at a large round table. Richard, Ashley, Madison, Kayla, and another dozen friends, random people, attracted by the smell of easy money. On the table stood buckets of champagne, oysters, caviar. A feast during a plague. Richard stood with a glass, making another toast. To a new life. To freedom. To the fact that we finally got what we deserve. And you got it, I said loudly. My voice, amplified by the hall's acoustics, drowned out the music. The DJ, seeing me, instinctively killed the sound. Silence covered the balcony like a wave. Richard choked. Ashley dropped her fork. All heads turned to me. I stood in the aisle in my ivory suit, glowing with cold light. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like retribution. "Lorraine," Richard stammered. His face went blotchy red. "What? What are you doing here? We didn't invite. I came to congratulate you." I walked to the table, and the guests instinctively moved away, freeing space for me. "You are celebrating receiving the money, right? The money from the secret account." Kayla's eyes glinted greedily. "Yes. And you can't stop us. We signed everything. The money is ours." "Oh, undoubtedly. You signed." I took copies of the documents from the folder and threw them on the table right over the oysters. "But you seem to have forgotten the golden rule of business. Rick, always read the fine print." Richard grabbed the paper. His hands were shaking. "What is this?" he wheezed. "Where is the money?" "There is no money," I answered with a smile. "But there are debts. Huge factory debts that hung on me as a guarantor and which yesterday, in a fit of greed, you voluntarily took upon yourselves. Jointly, all four of you. $12 million, plus penalties." Silence hung in the hall, heavy as a tombstone. "You're lying," Ashley shrieked. "You couldn't." "Could and did. And by the way, Richard," I turned to my husband, who began to slowly sink into his chair. "That inheritance folder you so successfully photographed, that was a ledger of written-off losses from 2005. You stole information about a donut hole." Richard's face turned ashen gray, but Kayla reacted faster. She snatched the document from his hands, ran her eyes over the lines, and paled under her layer of foundation. You're bankrupt?" she hissed, looking at Richard. "You're a beggar? You said you had millions. You said the old hag would give everything up." "Kayla, baby, wait," Richard muttered. "Don't call me baby, you old goat." She screamed so loud that people on the lower floor turned around. "I wasted 3 months on you. I took loans for clothes to seduce you. And you hung a debt on me?" I watched this with the cold interest of a scientist. "Speaking of loans," I intervened. "Kayla Smith, or better said, Kayla Wolf, or Peters. You have a rich biography, honey. 3 marriages, 3 bankruptcies of husbands. My security service works better than your conscience." Guests began to whisper. Someone was already quietly retreating toward the exit. Ashley and Madison, realizing the money had sailed away, decided to go on the attack. "How dare you?" Madison shouted, jumping up. "You monster! You always hated us. You set this up on purpose? People, look at her. She's crazy. She wants to destroy us." She tried to pull the audience to her side. Stupid mistake. I took out my phone and connected it to the audio system via Bluetooth, which the familiar sound engineer helpfully opened for me. "Want to hear how much my daughters love me?" I asked into the microphone. Ashley's voice rang out through the entire club, clear, without interference, the recording from the kitchen bug. "Drive her to the psych ward. I have a doctor friend. He'll certify dementia. We'll dump her in a facility somewhere near Peoria. It's cheap there. And we'll sell the condo. The main thing is to get her to sign the power of attorney before she loses it completely. Kayla, you pressure Dad, let him squeeze her." The hall froze. People looked at Ashley and Madison with undisguised disgust. The masks were torn off. Under the layer of glamour and filial care, rot was revealed. Ashley covered her face with her hands. Madison sank into a chair, staring at one point. Their social life in this city ended in this second. Richard sat holding his head in his hands. Kayla, realizing there was nothing more to catch here, grabbed her handbag. "I'm leaving. And don't you dare demand anything from me. I'll sue." She rushed to the exit, pushing waiters aside. I walked up to Richard. He raised his eyes to me. There were tears in them. "Lorraine," he whispered. "Forgive me. I'm a fool. I didn't read. I'll fix everything. We'll annul it." "Too late, Rick," I said quietly, but so he heard every word. "And there is one more small nuance. In that document, in Clause 8, there is a note about the voluntary transfer of all pension savings of the signatory toward repayment of the debt to the primary creditor, that is, to me." His eyes widened in horror. You took my Social Security? My 401k? "I took back my money, Rick. The money you filched from my wallet for 40 years. Now you will live on what you earn yourself. At 72, good luck with the job search, without references." I straightened up, adjusted my jacket. "The bill for this banquet, by the way, will be brought to you. Cards are blocked, remember? You'll have to wash dishes." I turned and walked toward the exit. The music was silent. People parted before me like the parting of the Red Sea. I didn't feel triumph. I felt an incredible, ringing lightness. Behind my back remained ruins, but they were the ruins of a prison in which I had lived for 40 years. I walked out into the cool night. The taxi was waiting. "To Union Station," I told the driver. "The war is over. I won." A week later, I stood on the platform. The wind smelled of diesel and distant travels. In my hand was the handle of a suitcase made of genuine leather, light, compact, containing only what I needed. No things belonging to others, no obligations, no just in case for the girls' items. The city that had squeezed me dry remained behind. I knew that there, in the concrete boxes, a drama was currently unfolding. Ashley and Madison were running to lawyers, trying to contest the debt. But Stanley had worked flawlessly. Signatures notarized, witnesses present. They would have to sell their status items to pay the marshals. Richard, as was reported to me, rented a room in a shared basement apartment on the outskirts. Kayla vanished, dissolved into the fog as soon as she realized the wallet was empty. I didn't gloat. I simply turned the page. The train started moving smoothly, without jerks. I sat in a private bedroom sleeper car, alone. Gray industrial zones floated past the window, the smokestacks of my former factory, rows of houses. All this no longer had any relation to me. I took a book out of my bag, a thick novel I bought 10 years ago and kept putting off until vacation, until retirement, when there would be time. The time had come. "Would you like some tea, ma'am?" An attendant in a starched uniform appeared in the doorway. "Yes, please, with lemon and sugar." And I smiled. "And bring me chocolate, the most expensive kind you have." I leaned back on the soft sofa. For the first time in 40 years, I didn't think about needing to cook dinner for someone, check homework, pay bills, or listen to a husband's complaints. In my head, there was a ringing, crystal silence. I was going to the ocean. I bought a small cottage in the hills of Santa Barbara with a view of the mountains and the sea. There, I will grow roses for myself. The tea was brought in a cup that rattled slightly from the train's vibration. I took a sip, hot, sweet, with a sour tang, the taste of freedom. The sun began to set, flooding the plains with crimson gold. I looked into the darkening window. My face was reflected in the glass. There was no tired old woman with an extinguished gaze. There was a woman with a straight back and sparks in her steel eyes. A woman who won the main battle of her life, the battle for herself. The train gained speed, carrying me into a new life. A life where I owed nothing to anyone. So, friends, how do you like Lorraine Sterling's story? Agree, the finale turned out powerful. Many will call her cruel. To tell her own children they are adopted, hang debts on them, leave her husband without a pension. That's harsh. But let's be honest, did she have a choice? After all, they didn't just drain money from her. They planned to destroy her, put her in a facility, deprive her of her sanity for the sake of inheritance. Isn't that scarier than any financial revenge? What do you think? Did Lorraine do the right thing, or should a mother's heart forgive even such betrayal? Maybe she should have given them one more chance. Or do people like Richard and his daughters only understand the language of force? I am incredibly interested to know your opinion. Write in the comments, are you on Lorraine's side, or do you think she crossed the line? And of course, if you have questions about the plot or want to know how Lorraine's life turned out by the sea, let me know. Perhaps we will visit her as a guest in a sequel. Don't forget to like if the story hooked you, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories. Your activity helps us create. Wishing you all the best. A window will appear in the center of the screen at the end of this video. Click on it to watch our other most exciting stories.